Hey guys, welcome to week 2 of the course. And we are going to begin our disciplines as far as within ecology. I said that the course is organized in species ecology, then population ecology, then community ecology, then ecosystem ecology, and then conservation ecology. And this is the first discipline that we're going to do. This is part 1 of species ecology. So we'll talk about this week and next week, we're going to talk about what is a species, what does a species ecologist study, and what are the inherent challenges in being a species ecologist. Now, there are lots of rewards, but what are the challenges? Now, before we go ahead and get to what a species ecologist studies, how about what is a species? So what does that even mean? I mean, you know that I am really, really big on turtles. Love turtles, loved them my whole life. My graduate work was in turtle ecology, and so I kind of use that as an example here. But what is an eastern box turtle, and why is that a different species than a northern wood turtle or an eastern painter turtle, or even like why we say an eastern box turtle is a different species than a grizzly bear. You know, well, that's a little bit more obvious, but and so what we have as far as identifying one species from another is the most widely accepted, because there are different definitions of this, is what we call the biological species concept. Species are groups of actually or potentially interbreeding natural, that's in italics for a reason, populations which are reproductively isolated from other such groups. And yeah, you can, so they can't, in nature, if you have plants and animals that can't reproduce with one another and produce viable offspring, then they are considered two separate species. Now you have different types of reproductive isolation. I mean, like you can have the condition where, and again, it has to be natural, where perhaps they are separated by different habitats. Now that one gets a little tricky. They're considered two different species if they are never able to meet to reproduce. And again, that one's a little tricky as far as that is concerned. You have what's a little easier to understand, we'll kind of work down the line, is temporal isolation. The temporal means timing. So for instance, like if you take the sperm of a wood frog and mix it with an egg of a bullfrog, you can actually create this really funky hybrid bullfrog wood frog. But that would never happen in nature because the timing, they have different reproductive timing. Your bullfrog is going to lay eggs, reproduce early in the spring, and your wood frog is going to reproduce a little bit later in the spring. So they're reproductively isolated because the timing is wrong. Behavioral isolation. So you have this situation where you may have differences in their behavior, which never leads to a reproductive event to occur. Now again, in a lab, perhaps with one animal and another animal, you can mix the egg and the sperm and you could have some funky hybrid. But that doesn't happen in nature. So it's a behavioral isolation. Mechanical isolation. Again, you can take an egg and a sperm and mix them in a lab and have a hybrid, but maybe okay, science terms, the yahoo doesn't fit in the hoo-ha, and they can't mechanically reproduce. So they're considered two separate species because they are reproductively isolated mechanically. Or sometimes you can have a mating take place. Hey, whatever goes on in the woods stays in the woods. But the sperm somehow doesn't reach the egg. You can have situations where you have a fertilization takes place, but the zygote doesn't survive. You can have reproductive isolation where you have a hybrid like mating takes place and you've got a baby. There you go. There it is. And that baby it grows up, but it itself is sterile and cannot reproduce. Then the male and the female are considered separate species, like a horse and a donkey. You know, horse and donkeys can mate and make baby mules, but mules are sterile and they don't reproduce with one another. F2 fitness, the hybrid is fertile, but the F2 hybrid has reduced fitness. That is considered reproductively isolating. This little guy down here, big guy, sorry, that's a liger or a tigalon. I can never remember which is which. It depends which is the mother and which is the father. Where lions and tigers in a captive situation will mate, and they will form hybrids. That looks pretty cool, right? But that would never happen in the wild. They live on different continents, for crying out loud. And so we still consider lions and tigers separate species. So it's kind of more in the habitat isolation. Now, you will hear terms like eastern box turtle and eastern painted turtle, and that is fine. But when we talk about species on a scientific level, now that you're in college, you'll hear them referred to with their scientific name, or sometimes it's referred to as their Latin name. And what this is it reflects the hierarchy of their what's the word I'm looking for? The hierarchy of their groupings from a living standpoint. Like we're in like the kingdom Animalia versus kingdom Plantae versus kingdom Fungi. You get a little bit like more discrete when you get down to what we say the genus and the species name. The first word is the genus, the second word is the species, and the scientific name. So like the eastern box turtle is Terrapene carolina. And what this indicates, I should say, there are a few reasons where we have scientific names, and that is that it does reflect evolutionary relationships. Like, for instance, in the genus Terrapene, there are other species as well, which is differentiated by the second word in there. So eastern box turtles are Terrapene carolina. They're in the same genus as ornate box turtles, Terrapene ornata. And that shows this evolutionary relationship where they're separate species. There's your eastern box turtle, there's your ornate box turtle. Separate species, but they're closely related. They're in the same genus. As far as green sea turtles, again, it's a turtle, but they're in their scientific name, their Latin name, the genus is Chelonia and their species is Midas. They're in a whole different genus than eastern painted turtles and ornate turtles. So they are more distant related, green sea turtles with ornate box turtles than, for instance, those in the same genus that is eastern box turtles and ornate box turtles. And you have a few other reasons why. So you're reflecting the evolutionary heritage. But these names are they're universal. They're the same in any given language. So if you would say Terrapene carolina in any country that you're in, where you might be at some sort of a workshop or seminar, if you say eastern box turtle, that's in English, and somebody you are speaking with who does not speak English, like maybe Russian, will not know what you mean. But if you say Terrapene carolina, they know it's an eastern box turtle, so it's a universal language, like sign language. And it does reflect some academic credentials, like in your upper level science classes. If you are going to pursue science, you'll only ever use the scientific names. If you're at a professional workshop, you'll only ever use the scientific names. It might seem a little pretentious, but it does kind of put things on a more professional level. Like we never called in herpetology class, it's a third year class or a fourth year class, that's the study of reptiles and amphibians. We weren't allowed to use common names. We only ever referred to animals from their scientific name. So no one would ever say eastern box turtle. It would make you look like a rookie, or it would be very unprofessional to do that. So yeah. So what does a species ecologist do? Well, many of you, I should say, might have favorite plants or animals. I know whether you grew up loving giraffes or dolphins. You might have had t-shirts with them or book bags, or if you have a car, maybe bumper stickers now that you're older. Species ecologists tend to be very vested in their species. They tend to love them, and they sure better love them because their goal is to find out as much as possible about that given species or confirm what's already known. You might have, I had a student who was obsessed with manatees, and she had everything manatee that you could think of, including salt and pepper shakers, which is really pretty cool. So species ecologists tend to be a bit of an obsessive lot, but you have to be when you devote your life to studying any given species. So what do you want to, or what does a species ecologist want to know? They fully vet these plants or animals or fungus. So your eastern painted turtle, for instance, like the physical description of an eastern painted turtle. What do the males look like? What do the versus the females versus a hatchling versus a juvenile versus adult versus geriatric? What are their physical um, characteristics? How long do they live? How fast do they grow? The males and the females, are they different sizes? What's their home range? What are their mating patterns or reproductive habits? Their diet, their preferred habitat? Do they live in solitary? Do they live solitary? Do they live in groups? What color are their feathers or their furs, and what do they serve? Plants, what nutrition they're getting out of the soil. And we need to know this. If you're setting up a conservation plan, you need to know all of these characteristics of any given plant or animal in order to design a conservation plan. Or maybe you're not designing a conservation plan, you just need to know how it fits into its particular environment, what its role is, and its importance to that environment. Species ecologists, they spend a lot of time in the wild with their animal, with their species. This is a sea turtle getting measured for the carapace, that's the upper shell length. Here we're doing some studies in a very cold region of the world, as you can see. So it looks like taking some measurements on that seal. So you, as a species ecologist, have to go where the plants and the animals live, and you face such rigors in the field as we discussed, or we touched on last week. So it's a very challenging endeavor depending upon your particular species. And I always show this, and it like really kind of creeps me out. Oops, it's covered by the other pictures. Move it around. This is a tortoise, and as far as a species ecologist would go to follow here. Found this guy walking around our backyard. Did you throw it in the water? And she's releasing it, quote unquote. She's releasing it into the water. And unfortunately for that tortoise, tortoises do not swim, and she killed it. She was only trying to do her best, but tortoises do not swim, and I'm sure that it drowned rather quickly. So anyway, it is extremely important in knowing the insides and outs of all of the living things that we share our planet with, as far as that is species ecology is concerned. Now, yeah, I mean, this is a big deal. It depends on the species that is being studied, and there's all kinds of aspects that go into this. So I'll just kind of keep going back and forth as far as being a species ecologist. Now, we mentioned the field conditions. If you get seasick, you may want to change your mind as far as studying dolphins, right? It's a good thing to know. If you don't like the ocean, dolphins are cool and all. Manatees are pretty awesome, so are sharks and whales, but you need to go where they are. Um, and so that can be a challenge to go where they are. This is somebody studying orchids in a rainforest. He's rappelling up a tree to find those orchids in order to study them. Um, Anything that we know about any given species generally isn't because one species ecologist went out in the field and collected data. We can look up, it's easy for us to Google any given species and see all of these different traits that are attributed to them. And the reason we know these things is because of years and years of uh, academics or researchers or even anecdotal observations of collecting all of this data on these plants or animals, again, over long periods of time, hundreds, if not thousands of observations and people working together to find out what there is to know about these animals. Like you could just Google like American robin, which is a very common bird around here, and all this stuff, like how many eggs they lay, how high the nests are off the ground, the color of the eggs, how long they incubate, the eggs get incubated, um, who takes care of the eggs, the mother or the father, what the babies look like, when the babies would start to fledge, that is, start to leave the nest. And that took somebody just sitting there and observing this over and over again, counting, using a ladder, climbing up a tree and counting eggs, um, taking photographs, patiently waiting and watching robin nests and seeing who's feeding them. Now that if robins are relatively common, but what do you do when you're studying a species that is what we say an elusive species? Uh, Very not out in the open. Like robins are pretty much everywhere. Eastern painted turtles are everywhere, but they live in the water and they don't like to be seen or found. And so, like for instance, down here, this is a red-bellied turtle. It's one of the least studied turtles in the United States. And the reason for that is because their habitat is generally large rivers, deep rivers in urban areas. Uh, that is very, very tricky as far as studying a turtle is concerned, because the conventional traps that we use for our eastern painted turtles in Green Pond, they're put in water that's maybe the water can't be any deeper than about 3 feet. But if you want to find out about a red-bellied turtle, who's going to be the one in the scuba gear that scubas the Delaware or the Schuylkill River looking for these turtles to see what they eat or where they nest? Because as we found out, we do know that red-bellied turtles nest at night. So if you want to hang out down on the Delaware or the Schuylkill or the Lehigh River with and it won't come out if you have a flashlight, but a special lamp just to catch a glimpse of a red-bellied turtle coming out of the water, I mean, that's tricky. That's dangerous, actually. So how do we even find that out? We can actually, it's a little controversial, but a closely related turtle to the red-bellied turtle is the red-eared slider turtle, which are actually introduced. They're not native to our area, and they're everywhere. They're so common, and they're closely related. You've seen this through DNA studies. So can we actually, say, well, red-bellied turtles, red-eared slider turtles, we know so much about them because they're all over the place and they're easier to study. their nests tend to have anywhere between just say, 8 to 10 eggs per clutch. Can we assume that the red-bellied turtles are similar because they are closely related species? We can, with a certain amount, a certain degree, a fairly certain degree. It's a place to start, but as long as we proceed by saying we believe that their clutch sizes are this many eggs because closely related species have that many eggs. So as long as we know that the limitations of comparing to a closely related species in the absence of being able to find out other information about it, other ecological traits from a species point of view. So that's done with, it is done, but it's done with much caution and proceeding by explaining that this may not be, these numbers or this data was not obtained from the species itself. Can you also bring a plant or an animal inside or raise it in some sort of a captive situation? And can you use your observations, or can a species ecologist use observations and data collected in a captive situation and apply it to a wild population? Again, a little tricky. You can, some of the data we've collected on like captive elephants and lions and tigers have been useful when we are trying to apply that to wild populations. It's not always accurate, but you in the absence of being able to collect some of this data in the wild, it's the best we can do. And we would also proceed by saying, like, if we find out in a captive situation that this is the trait of a lion, we would always say, this data was obtained from a captive animal, because it may be much different when you have selective pressures in the wild versus a captive situation. Now, times have changed. Species ecology has come a really long way, and you're going to see that. You will see that in the next slide, as far as the technology, the recent technologies that have helped us in gaining information about any given species, like critter cam, for instance, or nest cameras. But times have changed from an ethical point of view and a moral point of view. When John James Audubon, back in the 1800s, he collected a lot of information from songbirds, particularly their physical description. You may have heard of Audubon. It's a very, things have been named after this person. Very famous for birds and for bird guides and for his paintings of birds. And he knew an awful lot about birds, and not because he went out in the field with binoculars and waited patiently and observed them and watched them, but he would go out in the field with a shotgun and he would shoot them and collect them in a bag, hundreds of birds, and he would study them dead in his laboratory or his house or whatever he used. Guess what? You can't do that anymore. It is illegal, much less unethical or immoral. Also, like for instance, what you see here, let's see if I can get that a little bigger. Oh, this is a shot that was taken, and what is happening here? Well, like when we would want to find out the diet, for instance, of this is a crocodilian, the diet of a crocodilian. Nowadays we would go out and we would observe through critter cam. You're going to be doing this as part of an activity later. You would observe what the animal is eating with a critter cam. Now, you couldn't do that before critter cam, observe what it's eating to find out what its diet is. So you want to find out the diet of a crocodile or an alligator, where you would catch it. This is a long time ago. Well, not that long ago, maybe 30 or 40 years ago. You would catch it, you would shoot it, not really catch it, you would kill it, and then you would cut it open from stem to stern, and you would look at its stomach contents. Wow. And you would look at and identify the animals that were in its stomach. And that's how you knew what alligators and crocodiles ate. Well, guess what? We don't do that anymore either. it is considered illegal, unethical, immoral. And so how we find out information is like, for instance, on the diet of an alligator, aside from critter cam, or other animals, they do this with turtles, is you would do a stomach flushing. You would capture the animal as humanely as possible. The goal is not to hurt the animal, obviously not to kill it, definitely not, and definitely not kill it, and try to reduce as much harm to the animal as possible, whether that's psychological or physical. So these animals are given light anesthetic. A tube is put down into their stomach, and then you would run water into their stomach, and the contents of the stomach would empty out into a pan, and then you would release the animal. Again, it's a difficult, time-consuming procedure, but if you are a species ecologist, this is just something that you would do to find out more about your animal. That's just to say, so times have changed for species ecologists as far as obtaining this type of information. But again, challenge is going where the animals are, right? Or the plants, and trying to do your best not to disrupt their daily patterns as much as possible when collecting that data, not interfering. Charismatic species versus not so much. This is a big topic in species ecology because, as mentioned earlier, you do ask little kids or even big kids like me, like, what's your favorite animal? What do you want to study? I want to study sharks. I want to study tigers. I want to study pandas. I want to study dolphins. There are some animals that are considered extremely, and plants, orchids, they're considered popular. They're like the top 10. They're everybody loves panda bears. Oh my gosh, they're on t-shirts and on tote bags, and they're the symbol of the World Wildlife Fund or World Wildlife Federation. Anyway, you go out whale watching. They're what we call sexy in ecology world. And so you have a lot of people who want to study them. So because of that, we know in species ecology, you have a bias of knowing a lot of information about these popular plants and animals. And we wind up not knowing as much about the ones that don't really get a good shake, as far as like an expert on dolphins versus like an expert on different types of wasps and ants or spiders, or just things that people don't think about. Like, oh, what do you do for a living? Well, I study the habits of this daddy long leggers, and we need ecologists who know all about them too, just because of the way the world works together. We have so many dolphin ecologists and so many panda bear ecologists, and that's really cool. But some species get more attention than others. Are they more important scientifically? And the answer could be maybe, usually not. But for the entire effort of ecology, it is an important concept as far as these charismatic species, studying them, because they do draw attention to the overall effort. If you remember a few years ago, there was a lion that was killed. It was poached by some dentist, I think, the guy was from the United States, so he was American, and he poached this lion, this well-known lion actually in this area, and I think he went there to kill a lion on some sort of game reserve, but it was outside the hunting reserve or whatever, so he considered poaching, and that just drew international outcry for this one lion. And because lions are very popular, they're very charismatic, and so it drew a lot of attention to the whole issue of lion conservation. And people donated a lot of money to lion conservation because of that happening. And when you have like the focus on a dolphin or a lion or a panda, just everyday people get invested in the issue of conservation. And for that reason, we say that they're extremely important to the overall effort of science and conservation and ecology. And so, we don't dismiss these like, oh, yeah, they want to study this, they want to study that. Okay. Everybody else is studying it. But that the fact that they serve as like flagships to the effort is extremely important. But, if you would step on a certain ant or something, nobody would care. But, well, it wouldn't obtain the level of compassion that a charismatic species would. So how that can kind of flip around to be a bit problematic is a lot of this research is done by people who fund the research, organizations that fund the research. And if you are really, really into some kind of offbeat animal or plant, and you might have trouble obtaining the money to do so because people are less apt to donate money to you, whether it's some sort of a governmental organization or academic institution, than not. So those are some of those particular challenges. As far as studying a species, we've come a long way, and you're going to watch some videos on this, and that's the next slide too. But just two concepts here in species ecology, the home range and the territory. Your home range is the area where individuals or sometimes you have species that live in groups or herds or flocks or what have you, where they inhabit. And through GPS technology, we have been able to assess the home range of many different species. This applies to animals. Your territory, that's a little different than home range. It's that little slice of the home range where the animal actively defends it, which generally is much smaller than the home range. The home range is that landmass, that area that's necessary to reproduce and survive, where your territory is what is actually, the animal will go after other animals and defend that small area. That is your territory. Now, as far as technology is concerned, I mean, just going out and observing has been done for a long time. We don't shoot animals or kill animals anymore. Don't pick the flowers, kind of a thing, as far as studying them. But through many different technologies, we have been able to find out more and more just in the last 10 years, 20 years. Nest cameras, whereas before you had to have people perched going to a high cliff with binoculars and watching an osprey nest to figure out how many offspring they're having. Now, if we affix this is a camera, we can watch all of these traits unfold in front of us. So motion sensing cameras down here, trail cams can give us information about species that we never were able to obtain. Your critter cams, this is National Geographic Critter Cam. This is the name of wearable cameras that not only has the shows you what the animal is doing or what it's eating, but a critter cam may also have the ability to test, like for instance, the ones that they put on penguins can have monitors that test the water temperature and how far beneath the water that they are diving. It also can monitor the physiological traits of the animal itself. Those that are put on like whales and sharks, for instance, that's a whale, that they also have like anemometer, kind of a thing to see how fast they're swimming and how deep that they dive. So this has opened up a whole new world as far as the obtaining the characteristics of species while they are out in the field. It has certainly saved a lot of you poor undergrads. All your professors are like, oh, you need to find out, what an osprey, what it's feeding its chicks. So you go out, every weekend with your binoculars and spend 12 hours a day in the field and record what is brought back to the babies. Well, guess what? Now we have nest cams. So the worst that you might have to do is watch footage of that occurring, which is easier. Not to say it isn't as exciting, but we certainly do use technologies in order to help us out in the field. Now, these particular films, these little video clips, you're actually going to watch for your activity. I think it's this week, it might be next week, how we are assisted by technology out in the field. Okay, that wraps up Species Ecology Part 1. And I hope you enjoyed that. Any questions, just put them down on the discussion board and I will attend to them. Take care, guys. Bye.